Welcome back to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Is there a better way to organize work and scale your business? Our guest trio today says absolutely yes, there is, and that's what they teach. And I'm really excited to have them here today. Their latest collaborative book, which is Lead Together. And if you're watching on video, you can see it. I have it here. The Bold, Brave, Intentional Path to Scaling Your Business. And a really excellent read, very in depth read, and I highly recommend it. So, our guests today are Brent Lowe, Susan Basterfield, and Travis Marsh. And what they do is they offer founders, CEOs, and other leaders a radical new way not a radical new way to approach leadership. And really, it's about transforming top-down leadership into a dynamic human system, and which involves shared responsibility and accountability. And we'll dive a little bit further into that. I'm really looking forward to this conversation as we kind of explore the principles and proven methods that have worked. I won't go through their whole bio. You can check that out in the notes. Maybe that'll come out in the episode in the interview as well. Conversation that we're going to have here. But each of them come from different countries, different parts of the world. We have New Zealand. Susan's from New Zealand. We have Travis in San Francisco, California, USA, and then Brent, who's from my hometown, Toronto, Canada. So we're covering a whole wide range of different perspectives, and I know they've worked with companies all around the world and have a great amount of experience in scaling businesses. So I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. So Brent, Susan, Travis, welcome. We're glad to have you here today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks, Nicole. Looking forward to it.
I can't
My
wait.
pleasure. My pleasure. My pleasure. And before we dive into it, Madison Taylor from Page Two Publishing, want to give her a shout out for the introduction. And I always like to thank those that support our show. And that includes the PR agencies, the booking agencies, and of course, all the people that are listening and sharing this message with their friends and so forth. So thank you for tuning in to our listeners and our viewers. We appreciate you being here. This is the reason why this show exists is to be able to inspire you and encourage you to be the leader of transformation that you're capable of being. And so I know our guests are going to be able to give you some tools and insights on how to do that. Make sure that you follow right to the end, because I know it's going to be rich with content all the way through. And so I highly encourage you to do that. All right, let's talk about this book, Lead Together. And Brent, we'll start with you. The book talks about sort of a different approach to leadership. There's a lot of leadership books out there, but yours talks about a different approach to leadership. And what I'd like you to do is kind of start off with, how did you discover this different approach, and maybe kind of weigh in on the problem. And then Susan and Travis can kind of talk about some of the solutions, and we can unpack it from there.
Sure. Again, pleasure to be here. Looking forward to this conversation. So, for me personally, I think we all have our own story in how we came to this work, but there are a lot of parallels. And so, my story is that I was a business owner. I then moved into being an HR person in a founder-led company, very traditionally run, and did that for a number of years. And then I was introduced to the concepts that we talk about and Lead Together through another book called Reinventing Organizations. And once I dove in to that book, and it really introduced a whole new paradigm. So much of the work that I had been doing, I would have considered myself a very progressive HR person. What I realized after learning these concepts is I was a very progressive person in one paradigm. But there's a whole nother paradigm that I wasn't really aware of. And so once I started to learn that and reflect on all of the things that I had been doing in the organizations that I was working in and that I was supporting, I realized there was a whole nother level that I could have been helping to take these businesses to. And along the way, then had that led to the self-reflection of, oh, what does it mean for me as a leader, and how am I showing up, and how could I be showing up in my own leadership role in a different way? So that took me on a personal journey. It was that personal journey that then led me to meet Travis and Susan. They have similar backstories as well. And then once we came together, we all were on this journey of trying to discover what could be different. How could we do things fundamentally different than the way that we have been doing them? And there's no better way to learn than to write a book. And so that took us very deep into these practices.
Well, and your book is also, you did a lot of research for your book, not just looking at your past experience, but also the research of other companies, over 60 companies, and how they've been able to scale their business using these principles. And so, yeah, it's quite the undertaking. I know you said it took a long time to write it, and a lot of work and effort. So, Susan, talk to us about kind of where you maybe pick up where Brent kind of finished off in terms of, okay, so now we start looking at solutions. Like, how did you come up with a solution collectively, collaboratively, that could actually work?
Mm. I think I probably would resist the word solution and pick up on the word pattern. So, as you said, we did heaps of research, and also we've been practicing this way of working, or these like theoretical new models in the work that we're doing together. And I think that what we noticed was that by and large, the way that companies have been organized for the last 150 years has been really looking at the organization like a machine to be optimized, people as cogs in the machine, that can be improved, but ultimately totally replaceable. And the kind of willful blindness to the reality that business and where we do our work is also a relational field, right? And there are relationships and people, actual people, enacting these roles and creating the abundance of the organization. And I think that that was kind of like the light bulb moment for me, is that, look, every time you put another group of people into a situation, the outcome is going to be unknowable until these people actually get together and enact the work. And so, this kind of overlap between understanding that the company actually isn't a machine, but it's actually an ecosystem of people, and the idea that when people are involved, things become complex and unpredictable. So it's about noticing the patterns of what's working, knowing, that it's going to be different in every single organization, but actually just starting to become comfortable with this tremendous ambiguity and the fact that there is no one way. I think really shifted everything for us. And then, so just noticing the organizations where patterns were similar and starting to be able to talk about that as a possibility for what you might choose to do in your organization.
Got it. Thank you. And when I read your book, it was so interesting, some of the approaches that you were taking that seem like, wow, yeah, why didn't we think of that before? But, the collaboration and working together, and the different approach than like a flat hierarchy, which is become popular, which it kind of implies there's no leadership and no leader. you know and so, yeah, Travis, can you want to kind of weigh in on this, and from your perspective, you know what what did you notice, and how did this build for you in terms of something that you could then go and apply and teach to others?
Yeah, I love the word that you were using on flat organization, mostly because I had a really interesting relationship with that myself, and like it was a way I used to describe what we were doing years ago. And as I noticed it, it's not really that accurate because you actually always have power in systems. Sometimes it's great if I follow you and following you in this podcast because you know a lot more about it. You know your audiences more deeply than we do, and I'm happy to be following you in this. And the same sense, you're following us and exploring the other concepts of the other book. And so dynamic leadership or dynamic hierarchy is a more intriguing term, right? Where is the expertise? Who wants to follow who in any given situation can be a more useful frame And some of us do have more experience in a particular business and what the customers need. And there should be some gravitas that goes with that. And a lot of what we do is taking the implicit and make it explicit and say, okay, great. In these situations, Nicole is going to lead, and these other ones, Susan's going to lead, and then Brent's going to be coming up over here. And so, how do we take that and create transparency and visibility around that so that we can actually turn all of that data that's around us into actionable information?
Awesome. Awesome. And, when you do this kind of work and it challenges the status quo, there are obstacles and resistance that come up inevitably. I'd be shocked if you said that there wasn't, in fact. So, Brent, can you talk about some of the biggest obstacles when you started to introduce this to leaders? What were some of the biggest obstacles that you faced in starting to implement some of these principles?
When we talk about transformation into new ways of working, there are three different iterative steps, I guess, that keep coming up over and over again. One, the first one is the knowledge, the just the thinking mind. Can I get my head around this? So undoubtedly, a number of the listeners right now are thinking, I don't get this yet. This sounds chaotic. All of those things. So first, there's the learning of what exactly is this new way of working, and at some point we'll get to a point of, okay, I get it, I understand. Then we go to step into the work, and the second step is the emotional step, which is, oh, as a leader, this actually means that I need to do something different, and that's hard. And so then we start to see the resistance come up at that point of, kind of it's for other people to change, but not me. And then once we do that work and we realize, oh, I actually have to change. And certainly this is something that Travis, Susan, and I have gone through. And I think most of us as practitioners in this space have a story about where we had to cross that emotional threshold for the first time and realize all those things that I did before, I want to do things differently now. And that means that I have to do my personal work. And then the third is once we get through that, so I now understand it, I've started to emotionally embrace this way of working. I still have a whole bunch of habits and patterns that I've developed over a long period of time. And so even when I want to do something different, my natural tendency will be to gravitate back to what I know. And we see that a lot in language, for example. So there is so much language that we use within our workplaces, and manager and boss and things like that. That all of even though we want to do things different, we will use the same language from the past, and that keeps us anchored. And this is an iterative process, so we'll learn a little bit about it. Then we'll do a little bit of emotional work. We'll start to change a few of our patterns. Then we learn a little bit more, and the three of us as authors are still on that cycle as well. We're constantly going around and learning more and deepening. And there's resistance at each one of those steps.
I'd just like to chime in here that the word emotional work is quite ambiguous. And just like in many of the elements that we talk about in the book, we like to have practical examples of what that could mean. And one of the elements of that I think is probably most useful, and that everybody can start to do straight away, is a reflective practice, right? So, okay, so I tried that this week. What happened? What did I notice? And either writing it down, journaling, or more appropriately, perhaps, is having that conversation with your peers or with the other people in the organization, getting together on a Friday and saying, okay, we tried this week. What did we notice? And by building these collective reflective practices, we can start to tune in not just to the practicalities of what happened, like the linear aspects of that. Okay, so we had 2 more sales this week. Something like, oh, I noticed that um, by really focusing in on our meetings on the blocks that we had and really listening and helping each other, that seemed to unlock something for this particular customer. So going into those reflective practices is a really practical way to start doing that emotional work in the context of work. The other thing that you'll notice is that we're talking about doing this work in the context of work. This is not, we don't, yes, sure, it's great to go away on your 10-day silent Vipassana meditation retreat or to go up the hill and do yoga. But one of our hypotheses is that doing this work in the context and with the fodder of business is going to be much more sticky and much more practical.
Well, you bring up a really good point there because sometimes, uh, oftentimes you'll hear that people are like, I just need to get away to get clear. And I'm a big believer in taking the time to get clear in quiet time. And it's like the person that's not in a relationship can theorize about how simple and straightforward it is to have a great relationship. But once they get in one, they'll realize the complexity. That's when the rubber meets the road, just like in business, just like in leadership, just like in anything. And so, like you said, to be in it, it'll be much more sticky. Susan, can you also talk a little bit more about let's get into what is this lead together concept? Like Brent kind of touched on it a little bit. You've touched on it. Um, w- like, give us a framework. How would you introduce this to our listeners who might not be aware of this concept at all? They're fresh, they're new, they're coming into it and saying, "What exactly are you guys talking about?"
Maybe the easiest way into this is to think about traditional job titles, right? So, CEO, head of delivery, head of marketing. If we think practically about what those are, they're sort of semi-randomly attributable tasks that sit under a heading called CEO. And our what our research and what our lived experience has shown us is that those are arbitrary and they might not be applicable to a particular person. You'll hear us talk about trying to separate the role from the soul, right? So if I'm identifying as a CEO in traditional organizations, all of this stuff comes with it. So being the public voice of the organization, bottom lining the financial decisions, leading out on the strategy, uh, um, having the final say on bonuses or what people get paid. Those are all roles that are normally identified with the CEO. But what we've learned is that each of those individual roles might be better energized by somebody else, right? So the idea about leading together is really noticing that, as Travis said, making the implicit explicit about not only where our skills and capabilities are, but where our joy is, right? Where our development edges are. And the possibility then to be um, coming in and having a series of roles that cover off all of those things, right? So might be the specific stuff that you've been trained for and have got years of experience on. It might be something that just like, okay, I'm the CEO, but I really, really love crunching numbers on this particular spreadsheet for sales, right? Cool. Why not? And even though I'm CEO, I might really want to be developing my empathy around um, user persona maps, which might normally be the role of a product manager, right? And so taking not only from the CEO, but then everybody in the organization, what could it look like if what we're coming in and energizing every day kind of covered off all of those developmental aspects? Because I guarantee you that if you're doing something you love, this is a well-worn cliche, then you're going to be it's the result is more likely to be much better. So that would be how I would describe at its heart what leading together is. So decoupling the old paradigm of the job title, looking at the roles or the tasks that need to be done to bring abundance into the business, and helping everybody figure out where they can lead.
I
Awesome.
can, if I
Thank
could
you.
jump in
Yes.
and maybe add a little bit to that, is so if you think about the traditional hierarchy pyramid, which we're all very familiar with, it's based on a model really of an adult-child relationship. So in, where Susan started out, traditionally, if you're the CEO, you're the biggest adult. And those that report to you are the children, and then those children then become adults to somebody else. And so it's a very top-down approach, and highest whoever the highest paid person is in the room has the biggest title, has the biggest say, type of thing. And what we're seeing now is that's not really how the rest of the world works. There's a disconnect between what we see in our personal lives and how we move through the world, and then what happens when we step into the workplace. And so if you think about, social media as an example, everybody can have a good idea. Doesn't matter where in the world you're located, how much money you make, what your title is, you can have a good idea. And so really what leading together is, it's taking away that adult child relationship and replacing it with a peer to peer relationship. And what comes with that is, in the traditional hierarchy, managers are often gap fillers, if you will. If there's something in the system that isn't figured out, then the manager figures it out. I don't know who's going to make this decision. Oh, I guess it's the manager. I'm not getting along with my colleague. Who's going to solve that? Oh, I guess it's going to be the manager. And in this new lead together way of working, all of those things get replaced by agreements and structures and practices, as Susan mentioned. So a lot of the clients we work with, as an example, and the companies that we talk about in the book, they don't have managers. There isn't a single manager in the organization. So if there's no manager, then, well, that sounds like chaos. What happens? Well, the power that gets often held within the manager title needs to go somewhere. It doesn't disappear. So it gets replaced by approaches, structures, practices. And that's what we talk about in Lead Together is, well, what does that look like then? Because for most of us, it's hard to even envision what we would put in place of what we know so well.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Travis, do you want to weigh in on this and share from your perspective?
Yeah, and maybe one way to do that would be actually looking at what are some of these practices that are actually useful. Maybe take apart one really challenging situation is how do you figure out when to part ways with somebody, right? That's the one that often gets pushed up the chain, sometimes very high, sometimes with the CEO and HR both weighing in on what these risks are, because a lot of people have different expertise in that. And now this needs to move to another group that has expertise, but there has to be a practice that supports it. So it moves, much of the function moves to teams. Right. So there's teams and circles. A lot of the companies that we work with like the approach of a circle, because it's everybody's got an equal say, and there might be circles nested within circles or circles that talk to other circles. But if it's a circle or a team that needs to make this decision, well, what are the steps that happens when somebody is parting ways? Well, actually, there's quite a few, and so like breaking apart that is the first piece of the puzzle, and say like, oh wait, well, how do we first get somebody help when they have a lack of ability, or is it skill, is it will that they're trying to learn or work with? And it's like, oh well, first let's figure that out. And does somebody have somebody that they can talk to honestly and openly? And is that different than a place where like the team might be wanting to create accountability? And the organization that Susan is a catalyst for, everybody has, which is in Spiral, everybody has a peer partner that is there, um, like a kind of a mentor and coach, and can fill that role. Can be a really useful practice to have in an organization. And then, okay, so we've moved past giving people advice, and then we can move into oh, it's time to make decisions. Well, um, the one of the things Susan was talking about was role definition before, and there can actually be an invitation to put it on the other person and saying like people can come uh, to somebody and say, hey, it seems like you're missing some of the other performance on here. We'd love it if you take on and like look and trying to discover where the role is that you fit best. Uh, and Edwin Jansen from FITSE, which is like a group that's gone pretty far in this self-organizing, managerless paradigm. Like like one of the things that he thinks is the closest thing to a silver bullet in this space is the role advice process. People going out and asking others, where do you see me shine? Where do you see me fit? And they leverage that process even when it's challenging and somebody's having a very difficult time. And so that's a very complex process, but when it's done in a human way where it gives people autonomy, people more often than not realize on their own that, hey, maybe I'm not the right fit here. Maybe this isn't bringing me the joy that I thought it was, and I'm certainly not serving the bigger purpose in the way that I maybe imagined I was. And so maybe there's a better way to go forward, and that people are remarkably resilient and remarkably capable if you give them the chance. And a lot of that is creating the other structures where people can have these realizations in a way that's both helpful and compassionate.
Well, this is really transformational when you think about self organizing and having conversations like what you just described, Travis, within organizations, which is like unheard of in most organizations. If you don't do your job, then you get fired. You get written up or whatever the case is, or your performance review will show it. And it's kind of like, well, this is what the job requires. If you can't do it, then we need to find somebody that does. But what you're talking about is actually restructuring or reordering it, and not based on role. Susan, you talked about this too. It's like not based on role, but based on who's actually on the team to do it. So this can sound like chaos to me, like how do you and I'm thinking about that objection from the leader saying, I just need to I need to get this done. Like, what if nobody on the team steps up and says, "Yeah, I'm good at that," or "I want to do that." Like, how do you fill these gaps?
Right? And that is everybody's fear, because I think a lot of us have also been in, companies which are typically top down directive sort of style, but we've also been in groups that are more leaderless where nobody decides whether it's a nonprofit or a family vacation, where there's like a diffusion of responsibility. And so you do need to build towards this gradually in most cases. It can be really useful to start with simple practices to notice where people might want to step in and step into to more. The the role definition and role advice process is a phenomenal way to start. It's not too scary. Most organizations already have roles. Most realize that the boxes they were trying to put people in, even when it comes to relatively simple roles like a customer service rep. It's like, well, this person is incredibly good on the phones, but this person's really resourceful at uncovering the issues, and this person cares about the meta structure of how we're going to prevent this in the future. And so, even adding those little bits of extra definition start to take on ways where people can be more leaderful in an organization and allow more and more people to step into that leadership role.
I think the other thing that is, I agree with all of that, and um, another tremendous difference is normalizing the acknowledgement of the relational field, as I keep on talking about, right? So normalizing the fact that, yeah, I might be having a shitty day, and that's okay. If we're talking about this, if we're able to share, like, Oh gosh, this lead together stuff. I feel like it's just being done to me, and yeah, I'm really lost this week. But knowing that maybe next week, or maybe even in the next meeting, you might be feeling like, oh yeah, like okay, like I feel like I've recentered and I kind of understand. Yeah, I'm all in, and being able to have conversations about what's actually happening, I think I've seen really transform this idea that most people know if they're not performing, right? We're not dumb, right? I feel the same way about most things, right? We know the things that we need to work on, and because we've been trained, or it's been normalized to never talk about these things, they just become stuck and intransigent, right? And so if it gets to the point where, oh gosh, Brent, he's just not facing up to the fact that he can't do this thing. It's like the projection that you don't know that you that you're struggling is only there because we've not normalized the ability to actually talk about it and actually like trust each other enough to have these conversations.
Well, and I know that you're very passionate about, Susan, the feedback. So maybe talk about some helpful ways to give and receive feedback.
I mean, for me, my kind of working hypothesis of what feedback is me sharing an unmet need, right? So if and I think that the dangerous thing about feedback is if we are approaching telling somebody what we think from the perspective of our version of good. Now, that might be absolutely relevant if we're giving feedback to somebody who's on the assembly line, right? Where there's one right way to do something, one good way to do something. But I think that we really need to be careful of projecting our benevolent version of good on others. And so my invocation is that next time you see something in one of your peers that you're just like, oh my god, I have to say something. Try this. Don't go and say, Brent, when you do this, it's really having this impact on me, right? Because that's a huge projection. Try this instead. Say, Brent, I've noticed recently that the way we're communicating has changed a little bit. I'm just curious about that, right? So you see the difference there? Rather than making assumptions and projections about what's happening, be curious, invite a conversation. Because what I can almost guarantee you that what you get back is not going to be the story that you've made up.
So true. Brent, do you want to address this since you're getting beaten up here a little bit? Dropping the ball.
Well,
Come on.
well, yeah. So, what I've been thinking about for the last few minutes is if I was a listener right now, listening in, I think I would still be quite confused about what is this lead together thing, and it is a very big topic. And this is something that Travis, Susan, and I, and many of our peers struggle with because when you're talking about a new paradigm that hasn't been seen or experienced, it's very hard to describe it. And so in Lead Together, what we've really attempted to do is there's, I think, 27 chapters, and each of the chapters takes one of these topics, feedback being an example, and really goes into providing examples of, well, how could you do it differently? What are the actual steps if you were to try something different, and what have other people tried? So Travis was talking about the exit process for example, and so there's a chapter on how do people leave organizations if it's not done in the traditional way, and there's examples of what different companies have done, how they do it. So there's some really unique, interesting approaches out there. So from the tactical side, that's one piece of it, and we, I think, cover that off quite thoroughly in the book. The bigger question is, well, why would somebody actually do this? Because as you can hear, there's a lot of work that would go into this, and we often say that whether you choose to work the traditional way or choose to work more in the ways that we talk about in the book, we are not suggesting this is easier. It is different. And we are choosing different problems to work on and to focus on. And what we would argue would be healthier things to work on. So we know, for example, it's been long held truth that, well studied, that about 85% of employees in organizations are disengaged. And that number hasn't changed. So there have been lots of different things that have been tried, but they're always within the same paradigm, within that same traditional hierarchy. And so if we really fundamentally want to do something different, then we have to change. And so there's all sorts of problems that come with having a workforce that's 85% disengaged, and all sorts of messiness there and work that has to be done. This is a different type of work and messiness, much more values aligned for those leaders that choose to go down this path. They will say, yeah, this is as hard, if not harder, than working in the other system from a, how much I have to be on my game during the day. But I learn way more. I'm a much better human for having done this work. I feel more whole, more aligned with my own personal values. And the reality is that we've seen consistently across the organizations that adopt this way of working that their employee survey scores are just top notch. Right? They're hovering at 100%. And so there's the work that needs to be done, and we could spend literally hours talking about how you do every little thing different, how meetings are done differently, how titles are done differently, how feedback's done differently. But the bigger question is why. And so hopefully I've just provided a little bit more context there, Susan. I see you.
Yeah, I think like what's just what you awakened for me, and what's really alive for me is like when I was sharing about my perception of feedback, and the idea that we know, and I think that I just want to speak directly to the leaders that are listening to this, and you'll know if this is resonating with you, right? You'll feel something in your tummy, or like almost like tears springing up behind your eyes, because like, oh my gosh, I have been sensing this for years, maybe decades, but never believed it could be possible. And so to you, I would say, follow your instinct. And I think that it's so interesting, because I think one thing that we have noticed, and that is true not only from the 60 odd organizations that we profiled, but what I see in my work every day is if you're truly wanting to transform your organization, the leader or founder needs to know with every atom in their body that this is what they want to try, knowing that it's not going to be easy, knowing that it's probably going to be much harder. But I would say just follow that instinct, or that, kind of somatic feeling that you're having right now, like, oh wow, it could be different.
Well said. And Travis, you wanted to jump in, and I love this, by the way, talking about the why. And Brent, you just kind of went over it real quick there, but if you think about, I think of the leaders that are listening, imagine achieving 100% team member satisfaction score. Like, just that. But imagine now if you had 100% team satisfaction, what that would mean to productivity, what that would mean to profitability. So, Travis, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean the business results are absolutely phenomenal that can flow from this. Like when everybody's engaged in the strategy, though the piece that really gets me excited is not the 100% team engagement, not the 40% year over year growth. It's when somebody's spouse comes up to me and says, "I don't know what's been going on, but things have changed in this last year." Or when a client comes up and says, like, the things I've been learning here, like they're great. Like they're helping the relationships and we're doing so much more. But what really matters is my relationship with my daughter has changed in a way that I could have never expected. Like I'm hearing her, right? Because so much of this is actually unwinding learned trauma, right? Like we want to be in this human relational field at our very core. And then we're told in the business world, put on blinders and pretend that like 90% of you doesn't exist and 99% of everybody else is irrelevant. And that is the only thing that matters. And when you open up the rest of that, it can be a little overwhelming. That's why it is so much work. So don't go in this for something easy. But if you've started a business, if you're a leader already, you're not taking the easy route already. You're leaning into challenge, and you're like I always like to say, entrepreneurs are like my favorite kind of crazy. They're they're out there trying to reimagine a world that is different than what it is now. And so why not take that opportunity of that reimagined world and make it the best one you could possibly imagine?
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have mess anyway. So, it's going to be messy. It's going to be work. Whenever there's people, I remember this saying, I forget who said it to attribute it to them the first time I ever heard it, but business would be easy if there weren't any people in it. I mean, it's transactional. It's just like, okay, you do this and this happens. But when you start bringing in the dynamics of people, it's messy, and yet it's worth it too. And we are designed to be in relationship. We are designed to, and I believe that every single person brings a unique value, a unique ability to the table. And so what you're talking about, what I hear is you're creating an environment where everyone can bring what they have to the table and be valued for it and work together and say, okay, if this is the outcome that we're looking for, what is needed of what we've got to work with, in what measure and in what order and timing, so that we can get that outcome, rather than saying our our leadership team has determined that this and this needs to happen. You fit this role, you fit that role. I mean, we could talk about compensation, we could talk about, there's a lot of questions that might be coming up for people right now listening, leaders that are thinking like, how do you compensate on this? Can I give you a little tip? It's all in the book. You can go get a copy of their book, because like Brent, you said, there's, I forget, was it 27 chapters or something like that? And they talk about in the book all these different things. So joining, when people join the team, how do you calibrate them? How do you create agreements? All of this. How do you compensate? How do you get everything done? It's so good. How do you have meaningful meetings? The importance of personal growth, how the personal growth fits in here, transparency. There's actually, you cover a lot. There's the one on chapter 18 on compensation. There's so much in here, and it's worth it. And so diversity inclusion, where does that fit into all of this, and how do you make this all work? So yeah, I'm gonna leave it there and say, you know what, get a copy of Lead Together. It's available anywhere where you get your books. Amazon, probably the most popular, but highly recommend it. You can go to leadtogether.co to get a copy of their book as well. And Brent, Travis, Susan, I'm just so appreciative of what you're doing, because it is work, and especially for you as consultants and catalysts and so forth. You could go in and do things the same old way, and it probably would be easier. And the only reason why it's really easier is because you're used to it, and that's the way it's already done. What what if we actually got to the point where this way of doing business, like what you're talking about, actually becomes the easier way of doing it and the simpler way of doing it, and gets better results? I think that's really the game here, the outcome. So Brent, do you want to just kind of final thoughts before we wrap up, and then maybe Travis and Susan, you can have some final thoughts.
For sure. This is a space of experimentation. And so to what you said, there are a set of practices that we know really, really well and we gravitate to. There's a whole nother suite of practices that I would argue are healthier. Certainly that I've really enjoyed my life more since I've been introduced to them, and I think that the same is true for the organizations that I've had the opportunity to work with. Looking forward to hearing what your listeners have to say after they've had a chance to check it out.
Awesome. Thank you. Susan.
Uh, yeah, just I'm still thinking about what you said a couple of beats ago, Nicole, about coming together and deciding like what is actually in service of what we're trying to do. And you might find that the way that you're currently doing things is in service of what you're trying to do. Just, I think it's important to say that we're not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we're saying ask the question, come together and try to figure out what's working and what you can try. And I just wanted to put a little plug in for our audiobook. So you can also now get Lead Together on Audible, narrated by the magnificent Lisa Atkins, whose book, Coaching Agile Teams, is the seminal read in the agile space. Travis.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Excellent. So, everybody out there listening, like you're up to something, right? And you're building something that's bigger than you, and it's not just to get phenomenally wealthy, though it's not a bad outcome if that happens along the way. And so, as you're up to something, what is that bigger purpose? Ask yourself that question on the regular, and find out what you're going to do if the money wasn't a part of the equation, and amplify that piece of the voice, whatever that is, and follow that, as well as things that are good business decisions and savvy, and whatever else has been guiding you along the way. So bring that into the equation more, and you can't go wrong.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a big believer in this idea of feedback, the debrief, what's working, what's why, of course, asking why it's working, why it's not working. If there's something that's not working, what did we learn about this? What are we learning about ourselves? And then how do we move forward? What would we correct if it's not working well? What can we do more of if it is working well? And I love that you pointed that out, all of you, in different ways. If it's not an either or, it's a yes and saying, how do we make this better? It's not like throw out everything that you're doing. It's looking at it and saying, if things are not working and you're not getting the result that you want, or you're getting you have high disengagement, which means you're missing out on talent and opportunity there and potential, then you're looking at another alternative, and maybe even a few of these practices woven into what you're already doing can make a huge impact. So I encourage you, again, get a copy of Lead Together. Check out, now they've got their Audible book. That's awesome. So you can listen to it while you drive back and forth to work. Those of you that are not virtual and are back in the office driving around, and we'd love to hear your stories. So, and how this is how you're, when you're applying this, how this is impacting you in your business, in your leadership. And so you can go on leadersofttransformation.com. You can reach out to us there. You can follow us on social, and certainly contact me there as well. And we'd love to hear your stories and how this is impacting you, because the goal of the leaders of transformation is building a better world for everyone. And that means that we need to address the issue of leadership and how we actually lead in transforming cultures and environments. And I love what our audience, our guests here have said today, even about like how that impacts your family. It's a ripple effect that goes out into your family, and how you treat your kids. And because how you do anything is how you do everything. It's like if you're going to spend most of your time at work and it's a negative, toxic place, or you don't feel like you're valued, that's going to spill over into how you feel in your personal life, and how you even learn, because it's a habit, how you learn how to treat your children. And it goes on from there. And so we've got to interrupt the pattern, as Susan talked about patterns. We got to interrupt the pattern and start looking at things differently if it's not getting us the result we want. So I encourage you to do that. We appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Thank you all, our guests, for being here. It's just amazing, diverse perspectives, and I can see how you lead together and how you work together so beautifully. And so thank you for that. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.